online and she gets ready to chat with her guest. I don't know if she can hear me, but I say, let me just take this music off for a minute so you'll be able to have a little chat. Right, there we go. So good morning to Denise. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm very well. Thank you, Steve. Great to be here. We just
Mhm.
sent the link to my guest, so she
Right.
should be coming on.
Wonderful.
Hmm. All right. What are you
What time
saying
should I
about?
be by you tomorrow?
I don't know what you're looking for. Food?
Yes.
Well, if that's what you're looking for, then I am not your solution. I am
Oh.
not the place to go.
Hmm.
So why do you call it a food, whatever? What you call it? A
Food fest.
food,
I call it. In my head, it's called Food Fest.
food fete,
Fest.
food fest. This is Diwali for you is food
Oh yes.
fest.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh
Tell me why.
yes.
Tell me why.
The food, the sweets, mm, eaten on a leaf, the mango, the curry, the roti, the pumpkin, the shatai. Oh God. Ooh, boy, am I hungry now.
Well, you will be hungry if you keep telling yourself so many
Mm-hmm.
good things about food. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a wonderful idea that you have because I really believe that our country needs to promote festivals. So what we ought to
Yeah.
be promoting is festival tourism.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, then something like food festival or food fest that is synonymous or aligned with Diwali can make a tremendous difference.
Mm-hmm.
But it requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of
A lot of
thinking it
planning.
through,
Yeah.
a lot of planning. It requires that our society move away from that form you have to fill out when you land in this country.
Oh geez.
You still have to fill out, well, you have to fill out a form when you're leaving, physically fill out a form when you're leaving,
Mm-hmm.
and physically fill out another form when you're coming back in.
Mm-hmm.
It just
But you know
tells
what I do, Denise? So when I fly back in, I grab a few of those forms and I take it with me. So I fill it out at home before I travel. So when I know I'm returning, my form is filled out already. I go on. But everybody know you have a pen. Have you a pen
yes,
there?
yes, yes.
I just,
The, the
we are
biggest
2024 going into 2025. This has been developed for decades. And we still can't get it right. We still can't do it.
Well, you're saying we can't get it right. And my thought is not a very positive one. My thought is we have foolish people leading us.
A
All our,
management issue.
this is a leadership issue. Management, yes, but it's a leadership issue. You see, I think that people follow whoever their leaders are. And the
Mm-hmm.
leaders eventually become their managers and so on. So they
Mm-hmm.
follow those persons. So if those persons are not focused on what the objective is and what we want to achieve, then we're not going to get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And in our country, our leaders, just hold a minute.
That's your guess, I'm sure.
Yes, that's my guess. So I'm going to take off my mic.
Just mute your mic there. There
Yeah.
you go. Right, there you go. Yeah, we need to, the forward thinking. It's just in my eye, we're in 2024 going into 2025. And let's look at the east-west corridor. For the next 20 years, do you think it's going to change? Or the same traffic that you're in on the Eastern Main Road from Aruca to Port of Spain is going to remain the same? The various main roads, east, west, north, or south, is that going to remain the same? I think about these things. You know, I don't know. Is it just me or it could be just me.
Steve, my guest is struggling to get online because she now has to download the app. Is it possible for you to send another link?
No, it's the same link. Um, WhatsApp me your guest's email and
All
number,
right, I'll do that. I'll do that.
and I'll forward it from my end. Yeah, it's the same thing that you did. Is the same thing they have to do, and we'll get this guest online. All right. Yeah. All right. She's having a convo um, with her guest. Yeah. Let me just get ready for the email for the WhatsApp. and I'll do the best. Do the
Hi, hi, Steve. Have a look because she says she's getting on. So see if she's in the.
Oh, she's backstage.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right.
just hold a minute.
Yeah. Right.
So Steve is my guest backstage.
I'm guessing it's out. It's not from here. So I'm hoping that I mean, look, instead of WhatsApp, Denise, I will say something, but I won't.
Please don't, because this is very complicated today. I've always been very simple with this. It goes on, the guest gets a link. So tell me, what do we do now? Power 102.
Yeah, tell her to scroll down and say enter studio.
Right.
Right, there you are. All right.
Okay.
There's Megan.
Hi.
Good morning, Megan. How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm hungry. I wanted to pass by Denise, but she said she had nothing.
Uh-oh.
It's a good thing I went by Ali's Doubles and picked up a couple this morning. So I'm going to have that with some coffee.
Okay.
And that will make my day. Let me just let folks know that right after Denise, we are going to replay the statement made by Senior Counsel Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj, and a statement that he made at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. So we are going to play that for you come right after this show with Denise and Megan. So guys, have a great show. All yours.
Thank you very much, Steve, and welcome, Megan. I do apologize for the difficulty that we've had this morning, but we're here. So let's just focus on being here.
Yes.
I'm the host of Power Conversations on a Monday and a Wednesday from 8 a.m. We spend time digging deeper into issues that are impacting our country. Our guest this morning is Dr. Megan Sylvester, and I love to say it, Dr. Megan Sylvester. This is probably the last time I'll say it, yeah? She's a music sociologist, she's an author, and she's a researcher. Welcome, Megan. How would you like us to begin?
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you very much for that wonderful, warm introduction, Denise, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Lovely to have you. So, Megan, when you are not working, what do you do?
Interesting question. Am I ever not working? Work for me has been actually a very pleasant experience all throughout my life because I had the good fortune to find a passion early in life and I turned that into work. And so because my work is my passion and my passion is my work, it's a seamless process and it just is always continuing. So I'm into music, I'm into academia, I'm into sociology, but I live it. And so it never actually seems as though I'm either working or not working.
So your work is your full life.
Indeed it is.
And that is so wonderful. But I just want to just pause a little and tell you, I hope you are having a balanced life, and that although your work is your life, that you're doing some physical activity, you're relaxing at some time. So is that happening?
Absolutely. Absolutely, that is happening.
Great to hear that, Megan. So, Megan, let's begin with some of the things that I am curious about. What does your life look like? Does your life look like in terms of the future of music?
Well, as I said earlier, and you introduced me, I'm a music sociologist. And that has been, for the last 20 years or so, been a very dominant feature in my life. What does that essentially mean? I study sociology and I look at music and I apply the analysis of music to it, specifically looking at the genres of calypso, soca, and kaiso jazz, because those are the musics that tend to be more indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed diasporic carnivals. So in terms of calypso and soca, that is where I dig deep into all of the carnivals and the music that is produced for these carnivals in terms of Vincy Mas, Spice Mas, what you would hear at Carabana, Notting Hill, and of course, those are the more popular ones. There's so many new ones that have emerged. We're talking about Carnival in LA, we're talking about Baltimore Mass or Carnival. And so it becomes important to see what music is being produced. I really focus, of course, on issues of identity. So, strictly speaking, sociology, race, class, ethnicity, and other ways in which the societies are stratified, yeah, color, etc. And so I look at the lyrics of calypso and soca to dig deeper into what is that symbiotic relationship between what the society is saying about itself through the lyrics and what the songwriters then interpret and write about the society. And so we get to better understand who we are as a people across the Caribbean and in the wider diaspora.
Lovely, Megan. What inspired you to focus your doctoral research?
Hmm. Narratives of resistance. That is what I focused on. And I wanted to understand what was really happening in terms of the music. Specifically, we understood calypso as an art form that spoke to social and political commentary. But we never really understood if this music had continuity. And that is a concern for me. And when I say continuity, I don't mean the continuation of calypso performances or competitions, but I mean in terms of different forms. So, for example, in my thesis, I focus on raga soca music, and I make the point that this music continues to do what calypso music is doing in a new time. So if we think about the 30s, 1930s, let's say, all the way to the 1990s, that's a wide span. Calypso has been making its mark during that time, with the first known calypso recording being in 1912 with Lovey's band. All right. But then when we look at from the 90s go on, calypso music, in terms of its dominance, I would not say waned, but it sort of slowed down. And so what you found is that, to my mind, raga soca music was that music coming out with spitfire lyrics to do that kind of contestation that calypso music was doing. So you see themes like race and class coming out. So let's look at one example. You have Singing Sandra singing a song, Voices from the Ghetto. That is a calypso. Then you have Bunchy Garland talking about a song in the ghetto. So you see that there is that continuation of songs dealing with issues of class. You would have Sparrow speaking about slave, I'm a slave, and then you see in terms of race issues, and then you see Bunji Garland starting to talk about issues of race in a song called Desperado, talking about how does the police deal with them. He also had another one with Prophet Benjamin talking about Bundy Fire. So the point that I was making in this thesis is that raga soca music, in some of its offerings, has continued to be this music that spoke out against the ills in society and represented a kind of contestation. I also want to add to that, which is not in my thesis, that the spoken word that we see so dominant now by so many of our spoken word artists, First Citizens sponsoring that competition that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, actually speaks to this continuity of this genre calypso in other forms for successive generations.
Absolutely wonderful. You use the word contestation.
Mhm.
For the person in the maxi who's listening, could you explain what's behind that?
It's about contending with and contesting against, going against what is the status quo. Because one of the things that becomes important to think about is what has been the role of calypso music in terms of the fact we talk about social and political commentary. We think about Rash Shorty Eye, we think about Chalkness, we think about Black Stalin. All right, just to name a few of these calypsonians who have actually made their mark, and soca artists who have made their mark with songs that spoke to a particular political history or social history in Trinidad and Tobago. And so when when I talk about contestation, it's contesting against the status quo. Something is happening economically. If you think about Shadow's Poverty is Hell, talking about the fact that this is something that is affecting the society and what do you have to do in response to it. All right, so contesting against the status quo.
I absolutely love your concept about contestation, because here's something that has been in my mind for a while. And that is that once we sing about an issue for Carnival, the issue just disappears and we move on.
Yes.
So it's a way of almost bringing the issue to life, but almost also forgiving them. And we just move on. So to me, your concept about contestation is absolutely on target,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't see how the results happen.
Mm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not a question. I don't know how you feel about that
Well,
statement.
that's true. But you know, the thing about it is that what is the purpose of art? Music is an expression, it's an art form. And part of that, the work of these artists, who are these songwriters, who are these orators, who are these frontline singers, background singers, because calypso is about call and response as well as soca music, is to alert the population, both the directorate and the electorate, about what are the ills facing the society. I make the point that the music and the lyrics that are created are responding to what is exactly in the society. And so that is a way we also speak about the fact that by calypso, our stories are told. If these are our stories in Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed across the wider Caribbean and the diaspora, this is where the political directorate or those in the private sector can take up the mantle to use the content produced in these lyrics to make the change.
Wow, that is a wish. I don't see that happening.
Well,
But
of course, but that's the thing. Therein lies the responsibility. Whether they take up the mantle is up to them. But that is basically what this music is supposed to be doing. People are not sitting down and writing lyrics for fun. They're not sitting down and talking about the ills of society just to mention them. You know what I mean? So that is why, even though it may not redound to change, that is the purpose of the creation of the music and the lyrics.
I hope that people are listening, and I hope that somebody will sit and say, she has a point, because we have the commentary, the social commentary every year, and I don't know what the reaction is. You know,
Indeed. Hmm.
I had an opinion about Trinidad music. That
Mm.
again, Trinidad music, there might be some negative things about
Yes,
it,
yes,
but
yes,
my
yes.
thought on it is that it was a reflection
Hmm.
of the commentary and of what is happening in our society.
Hmm.
How do you feel about Trinidad music?
Absolutely, I agree with you because that is what this art form is doing. Sometimes so we're looking at the content, right? What is the content? It's negative, it's considered negative, and inappropriate for many audiences. But the thing about it is that the lyrics, those are words, and words are written. Words are created. Words are formed in the minds of people. Then we have to get to the genesis of where this content is coming from. People are having life experiences and they're writing about that. And that is important to consider. And so again, to get back to what is the corresponding response? And that is what has to be considered. But first of all, we have to consider that content is content. If a Calypsonian sings it, it's content. If a soca artist sings it, it's content. And if a Trinidad artist sings it, it's content. And it is being sung, written about, and presented about a particular phenomenon. And we have to consider it.
Absolutely wonderful. Let's just reflect a little. When you talk about Caribbean calypso, when you talk about calypso, what is the history? What is a short history of calypso that you can share with us?
Right. Well, as I said earlier, the first known recording of calypso was in 1912 by Lovey's band. What we have is, information coming down after that period where we have, you know, uh, 1930s would have had this understanding of this push towards, exploiting the careers of calypsonians at that time. And then we had the golden years during the 1950s, and then we had subsequent with Lion and Tiger, etc. And then we had coming down different, Sparrow and some of the others coming into the fray. Um, One of the important things I like to mention, even though this is quite controversial about calypso, in fact, two important points. Calypso is a music that emanated out of the plantation system. It was a direct response to slaves speaking about poking fun at, in one case, where you have a concept of the humorous calypsos, the talking about life on a plantation. You're talking about social commentary, and then also speaking out about the atrocities of enslavement in terms of their relationship with their slave masters. And so you get this whole political calypso concept. Um, but is it? But what I mean in terms of that is that calypso, strictly speaking, came to its fullest fruition in Trinidad and Tobago. But it is not necessarily solely indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago. And this tends to be a controversial statement. People get upset, they get passionate, they get emotional. But the fact about it is that there are variants of calypso all across the diaspora where there was enslavement. And it becomes important to understand that in the history of calypso. However, because all of the forces conspired and aligned, coming to fruition in Trinidad, because this was the space where it was fully developed. And we saw that migratory movements of people across the Caribbean, yeah, some of the small islands coming to Trinidad and Tobago to perform. We talk about Sparrow, we talk about Valentino, and then there's so many others who were not born in Trinidad and Tobago. And so this is why it is a Caribbean music. And so that is the way that I like to look at it, because I think it is important to think about that. Calypso today, in terms of its reach, tends to, this is where I would talk about that waning in terms of young people and how involved they get in it. And one of the things that I have committed a portion of my life to is making sure that I get the information out to young people. So I used to be the Education Research Officer at TUCO, which is the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians Organization. And during those years, I spent my time visiting schools and speaking to young people. I teamed up with the visual and performing arts teachers, the VAPA teachers in the secondary schools, with the permission of the principals of certain schools to get into the schools to speak to young people about Calypso. And I also made sure that I've written a lot about Calypso. I committed my life to that as well, so that the information, so that for the audiences who appreciate reading about it, I've done that. I also have a podcast entitled Calypso the New York Experience. And I have just finished 2 tranches of it, where I interview calypsonians, background singers, producers, arrangers, anyone who had anything to do with the calypso movement from the Caribbean to New York. Yeah. And so it becomes important to make these inroads to get calypso out, even in this period of its waning. Yeah.
Okay. There's a comment on our there's a comment here that someone says, it's from Anthony Somar. He says, our people are singing a bunch of rubbish on these, and these lyrics are violence, killing, cursing as normal, and screwing everyone on anyone without morals. Believe me, this sister has the right analysis.
Oh.
What is your response to that?
I didn't know it was going to go there. What is my comment? Well, yes. And so this is why it's important to think about what is being produced. You know, this reminds me of the question that Trinidadians ask. But where all this violence coming from? We are not a violent society. And the thing is, yes, we are. Yes, we are. If we are hearing on the news that there's a lot of violence, we have in our communities evidence, police reports, eyewitness reports about violence, then the theme of violence is then coming out in our musical expression. How then can we be perplexed about the existence of this phenomenon?
Well, you're just raising something that I have tremendous views on. That yes, I agree with you that the violence has an originality in our history. But I think that there is a problem with the consequences, because there are no consequences for if you are violent. So that people think, well, nothing will happen, so I can continue to be violent. My other comment is that a lot of our leaders use language that is negative, that is abusive. They use it as part of their normal language, and language impacts behavior. So people think, well, if my leader could say so and so, I could say it too. So that to me, you're quite right in terms of the violence, and the Anthony is also quite right about the violence. But what I am interested in is the consequences. Anyway, let's get back to what our original conversation was about. So that we're talking about Caribbean music, and you're saying that it really has an African root. Is it an African root or is it a West African root?
That's interesting. Um, there, from my understanding, during the period of pre-enslavement, what we would have noted is that um, uh, kings, people who had kingdoms in Africa, across the 54 countries, what we noted is that they would have had slaves, and there was a practice of slavery, and I'm going to use that word now, in Africa prior to the transatlantic voyage. And so it would have been people who would have been from spoils of war, people who would have been, petty thieves, etc. And so, in terms of the trade that was taking place between Portugal and some of the other European powerhouses at the time, what they did is that they traded people for goods. And so it becomes important to think about that and, how did this thing really come about? And so when we talk about whether it's West African or African, slaves came from all across the continent. And so, and there's evidence for that. And so we see that in that transatlantic voyage, a lot of people would have died, etc. But those that eventually ended up here would have brought their culture, because when people migrate and there's movement, people bring their culture.
Yes.
And so it is important to understand the differences in terms of the nuances of calypso and music across the Caribbean itself. When we talk about a sped up beat in terms of beats per minute, and we're talking about small island soca, or we're talking about a different sound, it becomes important to understand where these songs are coming up. Of course, it's all mixing in a melting pot of people trying out different, approaches to the music. But to make a definitive statement that it is either only African or West African, I wouldn't make that distinction.
That's a lovely response, and you've given a tremendous history of why it can't be either or. It really has come from Africa, and it is both West Africa and the rest of Africa. Thank you ever so much. Our people on the Maxi saying, fantastic job. What do you enjoy most about teaching Caribbean music cultures in the African diaspora, and particularly in New York, where you are now?
Um, Exposing persons of African descent who have hitherto denied their ancestry or not been exposed to it, to the nuances of the concept that Black people outside of the United States are also Black. People, that is, people in Africa and people in the Caribbean. In addition, exposing them to details and information about what happened with slavery, because there's a way in which, and this may come to bite me, African Americans, I have found, hold on to their experience with enslavement and treat it in such a way as though their experience was the worst. And I think it is important to share with them what happened in terms of Haiti, what happened in terms of the French colonizers, and how they dealt with enslavement, what happened in the British Caribbean, what happened in the Spanish Caribbean, what happened in the Danish Caribbean, what happened in the Dutch Caribbean. So we look at all of these colonial masters at the time and how they treated with people. And so it becomes important now to expose Black people or people of African descent within New York, because I teach a lot of students who are immigrants, and it becomes important to expose them to other concepts of people who have had a history that would have been, entangled with a lot of negativity, but that the corresponding response has been different. So how do we, Denise, you've been talking about what, how do people respond? What happens after? And it becomes important to see that Caribbean people have a different, or, first people who have had that kind of experience have a different response to this negative past.
Yes.
right? And this is not about competing or saying yours was worse than mine. This is about understanding the different spaces responded differently. The Africans, people from Africa, whose ancestors or who have to deal with the fact that there is that history that says Africans sold other Africans into slavery. How do you reconcile that as an African from the continent, or someone whose ancestors were part of that? How does the Caribbean person of African descent respond or treat with this history of enslavement? And then how do the African Americans treat with it? So it's about this continuing, discussion and discourse about how we sit with and deal with these matters.
Can you give a little more detail or a little more explanation about your reference to Haiti and France?
Okay. So what we understand from the history books is that France, in particular, had the worst experience, or not so much. French territories had the worst experience with slavery or being enslaved. We're talking about beheading. We're talking about chopping off of hands and foot and feet, sorry, and other limbs when slaves were errant or miscreant. And it becomes important to understand that the British were not like that. And as I mentioned, the Dutch and the Danish, so and the Spanish. So there was a particular way in which they dealt with their enslaved peoples. And when we talk about Haiti and we talk about the situation that Haiti continues to be in today, owing this debt to France and having, being on the receiving end of all of these, natural disasters, the presence of the United Nations, and how that, has brought, challenges to the space. This constant challenge with political interference and short-lived political leadership, assassinations of leaders, etc. We understand that this has not just happened by chance. This is about this continuing relationship that Haiti has had with France and how that has been, meted out.
Lovely, lovely. A lot of people don't know the history of Haiti and the fact that Haiti has been independent for far longer than most of the other Caribbean islands. Not most have been independent for longer than all of them,
Yeah.
and the impact of that. Anyway, let's come back. I don't know why you and I keep going all over. I think it's because your content is so wonderful. So let's come back to your music sociologist content. And
Mhm.
you talked about going to schools to talk to
Mhm.
children.
Yes.
Tell me a little more about that. How did they respond?
Well, that's an interesting question. So the children who are secondary school students respond positively. As I said earlier, these are visual and performing arts students. So they are already in a music program and have a sense of music. The challenge is the principals and the parents and the teachers. Why is this a challenge? Because I could not go, I had to go, let me say it in a different way. I had to go to the schools where the principals acquiesced, because the challenge is that there are some principals following the lead of the Parent Teachers Association, right, which says we do not want our children being exposed to calypso. It is seen as a negative type of music. It is seen as base and pagan and inappropriate. And so that becomes a challenge, because today, up to today, calypso is not in the schools. A teacher, in terms of the Caribbean Studies curriculum or the English curriculum, can decide, I want to use this as a literary device. Yeah, much like you use poetry and prose, etc. But the thing about it is that if a teacher decides that they don't want to use it, those students are not exposed to calypso. Right? If we have a challenge in terms of the number of radio stations in Trinidad and Tobago that play calypso, right, then children are again not exposed to it. So how do we get this information about this art form and its content, speaking about our stories to the young people? So I've been going into the schools where I have been allowed to go in. All right. And thankfully, there are a bunch of teachers who are committed to this in certain schools, but those are, of course, music teachers. So it has been a fight,
Hmm.
a fight to get our music to the young people.
here's what is amazing for me, Megan, that our education system clearly is not supportive of our culture. Is that a negative conclusion that I have come to?
No, I think to a certain extent it's quite fair. I think it's quite fair. Interestingly, steel pan music has been in the schools, thankfully. But what we need is to have this drive to have calypso as a literary device. Because that is what it is. They are stanzas, and so it becomes important to look at what has been written about us. And this can be used in history, it can be used in social studies, it can be used for Caribbean studies, it can be used in English.
Yes, yes, yes.
You see what I'm
So
saying?
what I'm hearing is we really need a transformation of our education system and content so that it becomes a little more related to exactly who we are. So that's my conclusion out of that.
Absolutely. And I also want to add, I think this is important, that when I was the education and research officer at TUCO, what we did is that together with Brother Resistance and some of the other members of the executive, we went to the Ministry of Education with a proposal to introduce Calypso into the schools. However, we were not successful. I just think that needs to be said.
Okay, that's an excellent statement to make. And how could we bring that back? Because when you refer to brother resistance, I want to say to you, Megan, that you've just triggered my emotions because I grew up with brother resistance. And my brother who died was part of that formulation of a new approach. My brother is Everard, Shortman, and all kinds of other names that he was called. So you've just triggered me, but let me come back to Tuku and how can we get that commentary and that discussion back with the ministry, because you're no longer here and brother resistance is dead. So what happens?
Well, this is it. So that what I can say is keep the fight going. I think that if the new executive at TUCO is so, impassioned, they can, lobby. I think that's what has to happen. But I think that in the interim, get the information to the young people because, of course, this is how succession planning it takes place. You have to go to the generation, below you and then speak to them and then it happens. And so that is the best that I could say. But there has to be a willingness to accept and understand what calypso is. And it's all about perception. And this is why, Denise, I thought that it was necessary to showcase calypso in so many different facets. So for the people who like to read books, I've written. For the people who like they're more visual learners, I've done a podcast. For the people who need that face-to-face, I've gone into the schools and I also teamed up with Nalis and I would do public lectures. Right. So, and I'm only saying this to say that there are many ways that we could tackle this issue of getting calypso to be considered seriously by the populace. Yeah.
Lovely, absolutely lovely. Now, what advice would you give to young Caribbean researchers interested in studying the region's rich musical and cultural heritage? What's the advice you would give to them?
Well, one of the things I noted when I first started is that the research content was not there. We have not spent a lot of time writing about not only what our experiences have been, but in terms of sharing them widely to publication. So I started to do interviews. I started to interview the people that, as you know, and I did, I'm getting a little academic here, but I did something called snowball sampling, which is where you speak to some people and you start asking people, who do you think? I'm working on this project. I'd like to get this information. Who should I then go to? And it started to build. So you start at the top of the mountain with a small snowball, and then by the end, the snowball rolls down the hill or the mountain, and it becomes a huge snowball full of people who you can speak to, do further research with, have collaborations with. And so that is what I did. So for those who have found that they want to get into an area of Caribbean research, whether it's music or any other form, this is what you need to do. Go and sit with who you consider to be the gurus. Sit with people who you know. Start to do your own research about what has happened, what is the history of this particular art form, what is the history of this particular issue, and start to talk to people and tease it out. And then lay or create your own path if no path exists.
Yes, absolutely. Megan, as we're just about to end our conversation, what has been important for you in today's discussion?
Hmm. Um, I think the opportunity to share about my work, but also in addition to let the populace know, let your audience know that calypso music is not dead, that the study of music and music sociology, that is issues of identity, race, class, color, ethnicity, stratification, is important to consider. And why is this important? Because calypso tells us about ourselves. And if we are having challenges to understand sociologically or what the society is producing, we should look to the lyrics of the musics that has been written. All right, to better understand. Just because we spoke about the issue of violence, why is Trinidad considered to be a violent country? I recently did some traveling and I went to a Caribbean country, and the country will remain unnamed. And you know what they told me in the airport? One of the taxi drivers said, hearing my accent, he said, "Don't come here with that hate, because in this country we love. You all have a lot of hate in Trinidad and Tobago because you all are killing each other." And it struck me because I was the receiver of this emotion. But the interesting thing is, this story about Trinidad and Tobago and violence is widespread, is widely known. Yeah? And we have to start thinking about, how do we solve this issue? Can we get back to a time where it was less? Can we get back to a time where we were considering being our brother's keeper? What do we do? I am maintaining and putting forward this point that we need to look at there are many ways to bell the cat, but the point about it is that look to the lyrics about what we say about ourselves, perhaps as a starting point to try to understand who we are and why we do what we do.
That's absolutely excellent. So you're saying if we change the lyrics, we can have an impact on changing the behavior.
But I'm also saying, if we examine the lyrics, why you mentioned Trinidad earlier, right? I also mentioned songs about, Stalin and some of the others. It becomes important to look at what has been written. And I'm not maintaining that we just look at old, because somebody could be listening and saying, but they're only talking about old calypsos. No. Every year, there are national competitions with calypso. There's a junior calypso competition that produces young people singing calypsos. If we look at our recent junior monarchs as well as our senior monarchs, yeah, we would have had Tizaya O'Connor, we would have had Helon Francis, right? We would have had, other young people interspersed with older Calypsonians winning the crown. Every year we have all of this content speaking lyrics about who we are. We must not, as you said earlier, Denise, not put it on a shelf. Examine the lyrics. What are we
Yes.
saying about ourselves? Important.
Yes, I think that's a very important statement that you just made about examining the lyrics and understanding what is it that the lyrics is saying about ourselves and what is the underlying story. So as we come to an end, Megan, what is your goodbye word to me?
Stay up, continue to fight, and let's dig deeper into who we are.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you for being part of Power Conversations as we come to an end this morning. All the best, Megan.
Thank you so very much for having me and sharing my views with your audience.
Okay, then. Goodbye.
Bye.